Welcome to my channel. Advice for you, Rose Stories. The phone vibrated against the polished surface of the old mahogany table, the one piece of furniture I insisted on keeping after the split. I glanced at the caller ID, my breath catching slightly in my throat. David Marks, best friend since kindergarten, the best man at our wedding, the quiet shadow who always seemed to be hovering at the edge of our louder, more turbulent life together. Why on earth would David be calling me? We hadn't spoken directly. Not really since the divorce papers were finalised 6 months ago. There had been a curtain nod at the grocery store once, an awkward shuffle of feet, but no calls, Mark. And I weren't exactly friends, but the split had been well civilised, mostly messy feelings packed away in boxes, just like the last 20 years of my life. I let it ring a few more times. The sound unnaturally loud in the quiet stillness of my too-big house. Rain lashed against the window panes, blurring the view of the drenched garden I'd been trying to tame. It felt fitting somehow, a grey, introspective afternoon. What could he possibly want? Maybe something about Mark. Was he okay? Despite everything a flicker of old concern sparked. Or maybe it was something mundane. A piece of mail delivered here by mistake that had to be... It taking a breath, I swiped to answer, trying to keep my voice even. Hello, David. There was a slight pause on the other end, the sound of him breathing. Sarah. Hi, it's David. His voice was deeper than I remembered, or maybe just less filtered through Mark's usual boisterous interruptions. It was hesitant too. Is this an okay time? Sure, David. It's fine, I replied, twisting a loose thread on the armchair. I was perched on everything, all right? Is Mark okay? It felt like the necessary question, the bridge between our shared past and this awkward present. Yeah, Mark's fine, as far as I know. He said quickly, actually, I wasn't calling about Mark. I was calling to see how you're doing. That threw me completely. David, the quiet one, the observer calling to check on me. Mark hadn't even done that. Not really. Our conversations were strictly logistical nightmares about dividing assets and memories. Oh, I managed unsure how to respond. I'm doing okay, David. Thank you for asking. Getting settled in here, the lie felt thin, brittle. Okay was a vast understatement for the emotional roller coaster of rebuilding a life at 52. That's good, he said, but his tone suggested he didn't quite buy it. Or maybe he just understood he'd seen Mark and me up close for years, seeing the cracks long before the earthquake hit. Listen, Sarah, this might sound a bit out of the blue and feel free to say no. Absolutely no pressure, but I was wondering if you might be free to grab a coffee sometime, just to talk properly. My mind raced coffee with David. What would we even talk about? The weather, the good old days that suddenly didn't feel so good, the awkwardness of him being Mark's best friend. It felt complicated, fraught. Even yet, a part of me, the part that felt adrift in this quiet house, filled with the ghosts of a past life, was intrigued, curious, and maybe a little bit lonely. He'd always been the listener in the group, the one with the thoughtful eyes who seemed to notice things others missed while Mark held court. David observed. What had he observed about me about us coffee? I echoed, stalling. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the roof. I don't know, David. Given, I know he interrupted gently. Believe me, I know it might seem weird, and if you're not comfortable, I completely understand, honestly. But, well, I guess I just thought it might be nice to connect. You were a big part of my life too. Sarah, for a long time. It feels strange, just cutting off completely. He was right. He'd been there for barbecues, holidays, birthdays, kids, graduations before they flew the nest. He wasn't just Mark's friend, he'd been a fixture in our shared life. His quiet presence had been a constant, and maybe that quietness held something I hadn't appreciated before. Maybe Mark's loudness had drowned it out. Where did you have in mind? I asked, surprised at my own question. There's that little place, the Daily Grind down on Maple Street. It's usually pretty quiet in the afternoons, he suggested. We could just talk, no agenda. Maple Street, neutral territory, quiet. It sounded safe, manageable. What was the harm, really? A cup of coffee, a conversation. Maybe it would offer some strange form of closure, or perhaps unexpectedly a new beginning, not a romantic one. Heavens, no, the thought hadn't even crossed my mind in that way. It was more about connection, human connection, something I hadn't realized how much I missed until this very moment. Hearing his unexpectedly kind voice through the phone, "Okay, David," I said, the decision settling in my chest with a surprising lack of anxiety. "Okay, coffee, sounds nice." The bell above the door of the daily grind gave a cheerful little jingle as I pushed it open, shaking, raindrops from my umbrella. The air inside was warm, thick with the comforting aroma of roasted coffee beans and baked pastries. It was as David had promised. Quiet, a couple of students were hunched over laptops in a corner, and an elderly woman was reading a newspaper by the window, but otherwise the place was calm. My eyes scanned the small room, and I spotted him almost immediately, sitting at a small table near the back, nursing a steaming mug. He looked different, less like Mark's sidekick, more like his own person. He wore a simple grey sweater, his dark hair slightly damp from the rain, a few more silver strands at the temples than I remembered. He looked up as I approached, a hesitant smile touching his lips. It wasn't the wide, slightly forced grin Mark always wore. It was smaller, gentler, reaching his eyes, which seemed thoughtful, maybe a little nervous. "Sarah." "Hi," he said, standing up. It felt oddly formal, yet polite. "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure if you would." "Well, you piqued my curiosity," I admitted, managing a small smile back as I slid into the chair opposite him, "and I could use a good cup of coffee on a day like this." He signalled the barista, and soon I had a latte in front of me, its warmth seeping into my chilled hands. For a few moments, we just sat there, the silence punctuated only by the hiss of the espresso machine and the soft murmur of conversation from the counter. It wasn't entirely comfortable, but it wasn't unbearably awkward either. It felt tentative. "So," David began, tracing the rim of his mug with a finger, "how are you really doing, Sarah?" He looked directly at me, his gaze steady. There was no judgment there, just quiet inquiry, and somehow, faced with that simple, direct question, the usual platitudes felt inadequate, almost disrespectful. "It's been an adjustment," I confessed, looking down at my own cup. "The quiet takes some getting used to, after 20 years of noise." I didn't say Mark's name, but we both knew who the noise was. "I can imagine," he said softly. "Mark, he fills a room, always has." He said it without malice. A simple statement of fact, he does. I agreed, and when that presence is suddenly gone, the silence is loud. I hadn't meant to be so honest, but something about David's calm demeanour made it easy. He wasn't trying to fix anything or offer unsolicited advice. He was just listening. I worried about. That he admitted, surprising me again, about how you'd handle the quiet. "You always seemed centred amidst the chaos." Centred me, I almost laughed. I'd always felt like I was desperately treading water, trying to maintain equilibrium while Mark generated waves. "That's kind of you to say, David, but centred isn't exactly the word I'd use perpetually. Bracing might be more accurate." He chuckled, a low, warm sound maybe, "but you held things together." I always admired that admiration from David. It was a strange, unsettling, yet not entirely unpleasant feeling. We talked for a while longer, skirting around the specifics of the divorce itself, focusing instead on the aftermath, the practicalities, the emotional echoes. He asked about my plans, my tentative steps towards figuring out what Sarah, the individual, looked like. After decades of being Sarah Mark's wife, I found myself telling him about the gardening I was attempting. The art class, I was considering the awkwardness of navigating social events alone. He listened intently, asking gentle questions, sharing small, relevant anecdotes from his own life, his work as an architect, his quiet satisfaction in designing spaces that felt balanced and calm. It struck me how different this conversation was from any I'd ever really had when Mark was around with Mark. Conversations were performances, negotiations, often competitions with David. It felt like sharing a quiet exchange grounded in a shared history, but focused on the present. There was no tension in the way I'd expected, no accusations, no defensiveness, no need to take sides. The tension was more subtle, an undercurrent of awareness. We were Mark's ex-wife and Mark's best friend, sitting in a quiet cafe finding an unexpected ease in each other's company. It felt slightly forbidden, yet utterly harmless. He wasn't flirting. I wasn't looking for that. It was simply human. Two people navigating the complexities of life, finding a moment of quiet understanding as the afternoon wore on the rain outside softened to a drizzle. He told me about a project he was working on, designing a small community library, and his face lit up with a quiet passion I'd never seen before. He talked about the importance of natural light, of creating spaces where people felt comfortable just being, and I realised I felt comfortable just being right here talking to him. It was the most unexpected feeling. Of all, the conversation flowed more easily now. Meandering through lighter topics, books we'd read, old movies. We both, surprisingly, enjoyed the absurdities of local politics. We discovered a shared love for old jazz standards, something Mark had always dismissed as elevator music. David mentioned seeing a documentary about Ella Fitzgerald, and I found myself describing the Warren vinyl copy of Ella Fitzgerald sings the Cole Porter songbook that my father used to play on Sunday mornings. It was a memory I hadn't revisited in years. Precious and bittersweet. David listened, his head tilted slightly, his expression open and receptive. My dad was the same with Louis Armstrong. He shared his trumpet, could fill the whole house. Drove my mum crazy, but I loved it. We smiled at the shared nostalgia, a small bridge built across the years. Independent of Mark, it was in these shared moments, these small revelations, that the real connection began to deepen. It wasn't about rehashing the past with Mark, but discovering a surprising amount of common ground with David himself, layers I'd never noticed when he stood in Mark's shadow. There was a moment when the barista brought refills, and David instinctively pushed the sugar dispenser closer to me, remembering I took 2 sugars, just like I always had. It was such a small gesture, insignificant really, but it landed with surprising weight. Mark, even after 20 years, rarely remembered things like that. Unless prompted, David, the quiet observer, had noticed, had remembered. It spoke volumes about his attentiveness, his quiet way of caring that I'd completely overlooked. You remembered, I murmured more to myself than to him. He gave a slight shrug, a faint blush creeping up his neck. Something stick. We lingered, letting the conversation ebb and flow. Naturally, he asked about my kids, genuinely interested in their lives, beyond the updates Mark might have provided. I spoke about my daughter's struggles, finding her footing in a competitive job market, and my son's adventures teaching English abroad. David shared a story about his own niece starting college, the mix of pride and anxiety he felt for her. It felt normal, like talking to an old friend, except he wasn't. Not really, or perhaps he was just in a different way than I'd ever categorized him. The tension I felt now wasn't about impropriety, but about the unexpectedness of it all. This deep sense of being seen, of being understood by someone I had subconsciously relegated to the background of my own life for so long, it made me question my own perceptions, my own blindness over the years. Had I been so caught up in the whirlwind of Mark that I'd missed the quiet depth of his best friend? You know? Sarah, David said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious. I always felt bad. I looked at him, puzzled. Bad about what? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully about how things were sometimes with Mark. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. He'd been there. He'd seen the impatience, the casual dismissals, the way Mark's needs often overshadowed everyone else's. He'd seen my quiet accommodations, my efforts to smooth things over. "You don't need to feel bad, David," I said softly. "It wasn't your marriage." I know, he acknowledged, but friendship sometimes. It feels like you should step in, say something, and I rarely did. It felt complicated, like crossing a line. It was complicated, I agreed, appreciating his honesty. It was a vulnerability. I hadn't expected a shared acknowledgement of the difficulties that Mark himself never seemed capable of recognizing. "You were in a tough spot," maybe he conceded. "But I just wanted you to know I saw you, Sarah. I saw how strong you were, even when it seemed like no one else." Did his words landed gently. But with the force of a revelation, someone had seen, someone had understood even in silence. It wasn't pity in his voice, but respect, genuine respect. A wave of emotion washed over me, relief, gratitude, a strange sort of validation that came from the most unexpected source. Tears pricked the back of my eyes, and I quickly blinked them away, focusing on the swirling pattern in my Latify foam. "Thank you, David," I whispered, my voice thick. That means a lot." The atmosphere in the small cave seemed to hung with unspoken understanding. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't scandalous, it was profoundly, surprisingly, deeply human. A connection forged not in spite of the past, but perhaps because of it, built on quiet observation, mutual respect, and the startling realization that sometimes the people you least expect are the ones who truly see you. We eventually fell silent again, but this time it was a comfortable silence, filled with the weight of shared understanding rather than awkwardness. The afternoon light had faded, the streetlights outside casting a warm glow through the Rain Street window. The Kaya was emptying out. It felt like a natural endpoint. "Well," I said, gaying my purse, "thank you for the coffee, David, and for the conversation. It was surprisingly nice." "It was," he agreed, smiling that gentle smile again. "Really nice. I'm glad we did this, Sarah." He walked me to the door, holding it open as I unfurled my umbrella. The rain had stopped leaving, the air smelling fresh and clean. "Listen," he said, pausing on the sidewalk, "no pressure again. But if you ever wanted to do this again, just talk. I'd like that." My first instinct might have been caution, a reflexive withdrawal learned from years of navigating Mark's possessiveness and the complexities of social circles. But the honesty and genuine respect I'd felt over the past couple of hours pushed back against that instinct. This wasn't about Mark, this wasn't about betraying any loyalties. This felt separate, something nascent and grounded in mutual regard. It felt like friendship, a different kind perhaps, but friendship nonetheless. "I'd like that too, David," I replied, meeting his gaze. "Thank you." He nodded, looking relieved. "Take care, getting home." "You too." I turned and walked down Maple Street, the damp pavement reflecting the streetlights, like scattered jewels. My steps felt lighter than they had in months. Nothing overtly dramatic had happened. There were no shocking confessions, no scandalous proposals. The "you won't believe what happened" wasn't about some explosive event, but about the quiet internal shift, the unexpected discovery of connection and understanding in the unlikeliest of places, with my ex-husband's best friend. What happened was that I felt seen, truly seen. Perhaps for the first time in a very long time, David hadn't tried to fix me, console me in a pitying way, or draw me into any drama regarding Mark. He had simply offered his time, his attention, and his respect. He had validated my experiences without needing to condemn his friend, acknowledging the complexity of it all. That conversation was a turning point, not in a way that suggested a new romance that wasn't on the table for either of us. I sensed, and it wasn't what I needed or wanted. The revelation was simpler, yet more profound. It was the realization that my life wasn't just the sum of my years with Mark. It was the discovery that connections can be forged in unexpected ways, that people can surprise you, and that quiet strength and gentle observation often hold more value than loud pronouncements. It made me look back at my marriage not with bitterness, but with a clearer perspective. I saw the patterns my own role in them, and Mark's limitations perhaps with more compassion than before. But more importantly, it made me look forward. The loneliness that had clung to me like the damp air felt less oppressive. The future seemed less like a vast, empty space and more like a landscape waiting to be explored. Talking with David had reminded me of my own worth, reflected back at me through his quiet respect. It showed me that kindness and understanding could exist where I least expected them. We did have coffee, again occasionally. Sometimes we talk about books or music, sometimes about the challenges of navigating life post-divorce, sometimes just about the weather. It remained simple, uncomplicated, grounded in that initial, surprising afternoon. It wasn't a replacement for the life I'd lost, but a quiet affirmation that new connections built on honesty and mutual respect were possible. It was a reminder that even after the noise fades, there can be meaning and warmth in the quiet conversations, in being truly heard, and in seeing yourself reflected kindly in someone else's eyes. And that, I think, is something worth believing.